Good morning. Hi, I'm Craig, and this is Marauder's Might. I know I don't talk for my returning viewers. Thanks for coming back. I know I don't talk all that often about the mechanics behind the channel, but this is more or less the 1 year anniversary. And I wanted to stop for a moment and say to all my subscribers, thank you. To all the viewers who don't subscribe, thank you. And to the new viewers, thank you too. This is going fabulously well for me. And I hope that it's going really well for you guys. A year ago, roughly, at 1.1, I said that I was never going to ask you all for anything. I'd like to think I've kept to that, and I wanted to reaffirm that. No matter what type of viewer you are, whether you've never seen me before, thank you, and I am not going to ask you for anything. I've been trying out a tagline where something like a place where every Neville has a place to talk. And that includes you. So if you feel like participating, your ideas and you are welcome here too, regardless of who you are, as long as you are kind to real people. What I'm going to be doing today is reading 5 point. I'm going to be finishing the second half of The Centaur and the Sneak, chapter 27 from Harry Potter Book 5, which is The Order of the Phoenix. The second half. And as I go along, I will stop, hopefully at the end of scenes, and then call out things that I have tabbed that I noticed that indicates some system stuff that I'd like to talk about. And here we're going to talk about the systems inside of people, the social systems in which they interact with each other, and the institutional systems that contain all of those previous things. Then we're going to look at the intersection of those systems and the forces and constraints that are imposed and the lack of options that may result. And we're going to try to do all of this in a very shame-reducing way, because these are fictional characters, but some of these issues do affect real people. In that vein, this is a YA book, but this is not a YA read. So if you need to take a break and step away from the material, don't feel bad. I'm doing it, and I need a break sometimes. And I think that pretty much catches us up. So for a brief recap, I left off where Malfoy had just jumped out of a dragon vase, snagged Potter, and then Umbridge says, "You can come with me to the headmaster's office, Potter." All right. I apologize for the unusually long intro, but I wanted to do it. So, without any further ado, chapter 27, part 2. Let's begin. They were at the stone gargoyle within minutes. Harry wondered how many of the others had been caught. He thought of Ron. Mrs. Weasley would kill him, and of how Hermione would feel if she was expelled before she could take her owls. And it had been Seamus's very first meeting, and Neville had been getting so good. Ooh, I like that one. Fizzing Wisby, sang Umbridge, and the stone gargoyle jumped aside. The wall behind split open, and they ascended the moving stone staircase. They reached the polished door with the griffin knocker, but Umbridge did not bother to knock. She strode straight inside, still holding tight to Harry. The office was full of people. Dumbledore was sitting behind his desk, his expression serene, the tips of his long fingers together. Professor McGonagall stood rigidly beside him, her face extremely tense. Cornelius Fudge, Minister of Magic, was rocking backward and forward on his toes beside the fire, apparently immensely pleased with the situation. Kingsley Shacklebolt and a tough-looking wizard Harry did not recognize, with the very short, wiry hair were positioned on either side of the door like guards, and the freckled, bespectacled form of Percy Weasley hovered excitedly beside the wall. Oh no. A quill and a heavy scroll of parchment in his hands, apparently poised to take notes. The portraits of old headmasters and mistresses were not shaming sleep tonight. All of them were watching what was happening below, alert and serious. As Harry entered, a few flitted into neighboring frames and whispered urgently into their neighbors' ears. Harry pulled himself free of Umbridge's grasp as the door swung shut behind them. Cornelius Fudge was glaring at him with a kind of vicious satisfaction on his face. "Well," he said. "Well, well, well." Harry replied with the dirtiest look he could muster. His heart drummed madly inside him, but his brain was oddly cool and clear. Oh, this is good stuff right here. "He was heading back to Gryffindor Tower," said Umbridge. There was an indecent excitement in her voice, the same callous pleasure Harry had heard as she watched Professor Trelawney dissolving with misery in the entrance hall. The Malfoy boy cornered him. "Did he? Did he?" said Fudge appreciatively. "I must remember to tell Lucius. Well, Potter, I expect you know why you are here." Harry fully intended to respond with a defiant yes. His mouth had opened, and the word was half formed when he caught sight of Dumbledore's face. Dumbledore was not looking directly at Harry. His eyes were fixed on a point just over his shoulder. But as Harry stared at him, he shook his head a fraction of an inch to each side. Oh, this is already getting good. I'm liking the second half of this chapter. Harry changed direction mid-word. "Yeah, no." "I beg your pardon?" said Fudge. "No," said Harry firmly. "You don't know why you're here?" "No, I don't," said Harry. Fudge looked incredulously from Harry to Professor Umbridge. Harry took advantage of his momentary inattention to steal another quick look at Dumbledore, who gave the carpet the tiniest of nods and the shadow of a wink. "So you have no idea," said Fudge in a voice positively sagging with sarcasm, "why Professor Umbridge has brought you to this office? You are not aware that you have broken any school rules?" "School rules?" said Harry. "No." "Or ministry decrees?" amended Fudge angrily. "Not that I'm aware of," said Harry blandly. His heart was still hammering very fast. It was almost worth telling these lies to watch Fudge's blood pressure rising, but he could not see how on earth he could get away with them. If somebody had tipped off Umbridge about the DA, then he, the leader, might as well be packing his trunk right now. "So it's news to you, is it?" Sorry, I almost let the trunk slip right past me. "So it's news to you, is it?" said Fudge, his voice now thick with anger, "that an illegal student organization has been discovered within this school." "Yes, it is," said Harry, hoisting an unconvincing look of innocent surprise on his face. "I think, Minister," said Umbridge silkily from beside him, "we might make better progress if I fetch our informant." "Yes, yes, do," said Fudge, nodding, and he glanced maliciously at Dumbledore as Umbridge left the room. "There's nothing like a good witness, is there, Dumbledore?" "Nothing at all, Cornelius," said Dumbledore gravely, inclining his head. There was a wait of several minutes in which nobody looked at each other. Then Harry heard the door open behind him. Umbridge moved past him into the room. Gripping by the shoulder, Cho's curly-haired friend Marietta, who was hiding her face in her hands. "Don't be scared, dear. Don't be frightened," said Professor Umbridge, softly patting her back. "It's quite all right now. You have done the right thing. The minister is very pleased with you. He'll be telling your mother what a good girl you've been. Marietta's mother, Minister," she added, looking up at Fudge, "is Madame Edgecombe from the Department of Magical Transportation, Flu Network office. She's been helping us police the Hogwarts fires, you know? Jolly good, jolly good, said Fudge heartily. Like mother, like daughter, eh? Well, come on now, dear. Look up. Don't be shy. Let's hear what you've got to. Galloping gargoyles. As Marietta raised her head, Fudge leapt backward in shock, nearly landing himself in the fire. He cursed and stamped on the hem of his cloak, which had started to smoke, and Marietta gave a wail and pulled the neck of her robes right up to her eyes, but not before the whole room had seen that her face was horribly disfigured by a series of close set purple pustules that had spread across her nose and cheeks to form the word sneak. Never mind the spots now, dear, said Umbridge impatiently. Just take your robes away from your mouth and tell the minister. But Marietta gave another muffled wail and shook her head frantically. Oh, very well, you silly girl. I'll tell him, snapped Umbridge. She hitched her sickly smile back onto her face and said, Well, minister, Miss Edgecombe here came to my office shortly after dinner this evening and told me she had something she wanted to tell me. She said if I proceeded to a secret room on the 7th floor, sometimes known as the room of requirement, I would find out something to my advantage. I questioned her a little further, and she admitted that there was to be some kind of meeting there. Unfortunately, at that point, this hex, she waved impatiently at Marietta's concealed face, came into operation, and upon catching sight of her face in my mirror, the girl became too distressed to tell me any more. Well, now, said Fudge, fixing Marietta with what he evidently imagined was a kind and fatherly look. It was very brave of you, my dear, coming to tell Professor Umbridge. You did exactly the right thing. Now, will you tell me what happened at this meeting? What was its purpose? Who was there? But Marietta would not speak. She merely shook her head again, her eyes wide and fearful. Haven't we got a counter jinx for this? Fudge asked Umbridge impatiently, gesturing at Marietta's face. So she can speak freely? I have not yet managed to find one, Umbridge admitted grudgingly, and Harry felt a surge of pride in Hermione's jinxing ability. But it doesn't matter if she won't speak. I can take up the story from here. You will remember, Minister, that I sent you a report back in October that Potter had met a number of fellow students in the Hog's Head and Hogsmeade. And what is your evidence for that? Cut in Professor McGonagall. I have testimony from Willie Witterson's Minerva, who happened to be in the bar at the time. He was heavily bandaged, and it is true, but his hearing was quite unimpaired, said Umbridge smugly. He heard every word Potter said and hastened straight to the school to report to me. Oh, so that's why he wasn't prosecuted for setting up all those regurgitating toilets, said Professor McGonagall, raising her eyebrows. What an interesting insight into our justice system. Blatant corruption, roared the portrait of the corpulent red-nosed wizard on the wall behind Dumbledore's desk. The ministry did not cut deals with petty criminals in my day. No, sir, they did not. Thank you, Fortescue. That'll do, said Dumbledore softly. The purpose of Potter's meeting with the students, continued Professor Umbridge, was to persuade them to join an illegal society whose aim was to learn spells and curses the ministry has decided are inappropriate for school age. I think you're wrong there, said Dumbledore quietly, peering at her over the half-moon spectacles perched halfway down his crooked nose. Harry stared at him. He could not see how Dumbledore was going to talk him out of this one. If Willie Wittershins had indeed heard every word he said in the Hog's Head, there was simply no escaping it. Well, on that cliffhanger, let's take a pause because this is a long scene and my tabs are piling up. We'll start with the comments. Good morning, Katie. And then Katie. Harry is caught by Umbridge, but he's thinking of the consequences for his friends and not for himself. I'm going to address that a little bit more here in a bit. But yeah, his thinking is really interesting here. From Bex, Umbridge was happy like when she saw Trelawney dissolving. Umbridge loves other people's sorrows. She's like a Dementor. Maybe. But is it everybody's sorrow, or does she like causing the sorrow? Because Dementors, I feel, just seem to feed on sorrow. They're kind of agnostic about from where. I think Umbridge doesn't just enjoy pain, she might enjoy causing it. But we can't prove that yet. From Katie, Hermione's handiwork all over Marietta's face. I think Hermione should have warned them all before they signed the paper. Just knowing who the sneak is isn't very useful when the secret is already out. Well, we know Hermione has some development to do around her ideas of consent. This is definitely true. Yes, and perhaps it wasn't meant to deter people. Because if you told people that there was a thing like that to catch them, they would probably, if they wanted to do such a thing, they would probably try to figure out how to get around it instead of actually being caught by it. So it was maybe not preventive, just a diagnostic that, hey, this has happened. And then for Katie, I feel bad for Marietta. She thought she was doing the right thing. It was influenced by her mother, like Seamus was. We're going to talk more about that scene here in a bit, too. And then from Bex, so much of the ministry corruption has been brought to light here. Yes, ma'am, it has. All right, on to the tabs. First thing I tabbed, and it had been Seamus's very first Neville meeting, and Neville had been getting so good. Where in the book series has anybody said anything like that about Neville thus far? All right. Umbridge did not bother to knock. She strode straight inside, holding tight to Harry. Two things here. What do we imagine that Umbridge, who has always been at least plausibly institutionally respectful to Dumbledore's position, where does Umbridge think the powers sit in this moment with her walking into his office like that? And then Dumbledore is serene. He's calm. He appears regulated. This is important. And yeah, don't let me skip over the fact that she was clutching Harry tight. People are always dragging Harry around so far. The portraits are paying attention. And Cornelius Fudge was glaring with a vicious satisfaction upon his face. Harry, having grown up as he did, didn't really start off deliberately in the series, deliberately antagonizing authority in moments where he plausibly could be punished. But look at him now. Harry replied with the dirtiest look he could muster. Yeah, let me take this tab down. His heart drummed madly inside him. His brain was oddly cool and clear. Now, a lot of the conflicts we've seen Harry in before, what would we evaluate his previous emotional regulation in the face of conflict skill level at? What does it look like now? There was excitement in her voice, the same callous pleasure. Yes, Bex. As she watched Trelawney dissolving in misery. Yep. Finger on the button right there. We don't know why, and we don't know to whom, but we do know in some cases, Umbridge enjoys misery. Fudge did not expect Harry's answer, and he looked incredulously. Now, for chapters, we've been talking about attention and where you're looking. Harry took advantage of Fudge's momentary inattention to steal another look at Dumbledore. And in carefully directing his attention, Harry is actually getting the information he needs from another adult, from a adult, to navigate this situation. Small, tiny clues that he has to be calm and look for, but they're there. Yeah, that's pretty cool. His heart was still hammering very fast. It was almost worth telling these lies to watch Fudge. But he didn't understand how he's going to get away with it. But in that moment, the experience that Harry is having is not terrible to him. His body is reacting. He knows he's under stress, but it's almost as if curiosity and not fear is at the forefront for Harry. And such a thing is possible, friends. And he might as well be packing his trunk right now. I'm not going to do a full luggage ramble, but note it. Yes, said Fudge, nodding, glanced maliciously at Dumbledore. Glanced maliciously. It's just some petty stuff coming from Fudge. Now, back to the theme of paying attention. There was a wait of several minutes in which nobody looked at each other. Can you imagine being in that room with all those people and all of them are avoiding each other's gaze, just sitting there silently waiting? That's not fun at all. And then we bring in Marietta. Listen again to what she tells Marietta. You did the right thing. The minister is happy with you. We'll be telling your mom. We're addressing outside authority. We're telling Marietta because it's okay, because the adults say it's okay. What effort has been made to address Marietta's feelings about her choices for her? How does that help her feel it's the right thing for her? It doesn't. It's just telling her it's okay because somebody else approves. This is not a good way to approach teaching people ethics, I feel. And then, this is not a good organization, the Ministry of Magic, to do things with, because Marietta's mother is an important source, and they've given away that source to somebody potentially on the other side. I don't know if we hear about Marietta's mother again, but if I were in some sort of resistance movement like Harry is, that would be under lock and key, and I would be using that fact later in my operations against the ministry. I'm just saying, that's just poor operational information control. Okay. And then Fudge is surprised by the condition of Marietta's face. Why? Umbridge could have warned him. Umbridge could have warned him before she went and got him. How do we think Fudge's reaction felt for Marietta? Probably pretty poor. And then we kind of addressed the whole thing popping up on our face. Now, if that was on my face, Being told, "Never mind the spots now, dear," impatiently would not help me at all. But Marietta gave another muffled wail and shook her head frantically. Now, the girl's clearly in distress, and Umbridge says, "Oh, very well, you silly girl," aka your problem is invalid. "I'll tell him," snapped Umbridge. Well, she is just not a very nice person, is she? At this point, this hex, she waved impatiently, and then when she saw it, she got too distressed to tell me any more. Where does that center the blame for Marietta not cooperating with Umbridge? It centers the blame right in Marietta. None percent of this is Umbridge. It's all Marietta's fault. Right. "I have not yet managed to find one," Umbridge admitted grudgingly, and Harry felt a surge of pride in Hermione's jinxing ability. All right. There's something subtle here. If we look at this in the sort of lens of um, insurgents versus institutions, frequently insurgents have to come up with unconventional means that the system, probably cheap and fast, but unconventional means of resisting the system that the system doesn't already have developed countermeasures for, which is what Hermione did. She did something new to fight the system that the system doesn't know how to react to. And of course, Umbridge is happy to take the story from there. I love McGonagall's entry here. Oh, so that's why he wasn't prosecuted. All right, so now, very subtly, we're starting to reframe the argument a little bit away from Harry and discuss the processes of the ministry. What an interesting insight into our justice system. Blatant corruption roared the portrait. And the portrait is good because nobody can punish a portrait. It is an independent observer that nobody can really do anything about except maybe take the portrait down. I don't know. Petty criminals. He said the quiet part out loud because he can get away with it. Harry stared at him. He did not see how Dumbledore was going to talk him out of this one. I don't either. So let me get a sip of coffee and we'll get back to the text. I hope you all are having a wonderful time out there today. "Oh ho," said Fudge, bouncing up and down on the balls of his feet again. "Yes, let's do the latest cock and bull story designed to pull Potter out of trouble." "Go on then, Dumbledore. Go on." Willie Wittershins was lying, was he? Or was it Potter's identical twin in the hogshead that day? Or is there the usual simple explanation involving a reversal of time, a dead man coming back to life, and a couple of invisible dementors? Percy Weasley let out a hearty laugh. "Oh, very good, Minister. Very good." Harry could have kicked him. Then he saw, to his astonishment, that Dumbledore was smiling gently now too. "Cornelius, I do not deny, and nor, I'm sure, does Harry, that he was in Hogshead that day, nor that he was trying to recruit students to a defense against the dark arts group. I am merely pointing out that Dolores is quite wrong to suggest that such a group was, at that time, illegal. If you remember, the ministry decree banning all student societies was not put into effect until 2 days after Harry's Hogshead meeting, so he was not breaking any rules in the Hogshead at all." Percy looked as though he had been struck in the face by something very heavy. "Fudge, remained motionless in mid-bounce, his mouth hanging open. Umbridge recovered first. "That's all very fine, Headmaster," she said, smiling sweetly. "But we are now nearly 6 months on from the introduction of Educational Decree number 24. If the first meeting was not illegal, all those that have happened since most certainly are." "Well," said Dumbledore, surveying her with polite interest over the top of his interlocked fingers, "they certainly would be if they had continued after the decree came into effect. Do you have any evidence that these meetings continued?" As Dumbledore spoke, Harry heard a rustle behind him and rather thought Kingsley whispered something. He could have sworn, too, that he felt something brush against his side, a gentle something like a draft or bird wings, but he looked down and saw nothing there. "Evidence?" repeated Umbridge, with that horrible, wide, toad-like smile. "Have you not been listening, Dumbledore? Why do you think Miss Edgecombe is here?" "Oh, she can tell us about 6 months' worth of meetings," said Dumbledore, raising his eyebrows. "I was under the impression that she was merely reporting a meeting tonight." "Miss Edgecombe," said Umbridge at once, "tell us how long these meetings have been going on, dear. You can simply nod or shake your head. I'm sure that won't make the spots worse. Have they been happening regularly over the last 6 months?" Harry felt a horrible plummeting in his stomach. This was it. They had hit a dead end of solid evidence that not even Dumbledore would be able to shift aside. "Don't believe it for a second, Harry." "Just nod or shake your head, dear," Umbridge said coaxingly to Marietta. "Come on now. That won't activate the jinx further." Everyone in the room was gazing at the top of Marietta's face. Only her eyes were visible between the pulled-up robes and her curly fringe. Perhaps it was a trick of the firelight, but her eyes looked oddly blank. And then, to Harry's utter amazement, Marietta shook her head. Umbridge looked quickly at Fudge and then back at Marietta. "I don't think you understood the question, did you, dear? I'm asking whether you've been going to these meetings for the past 6 months. You have, haven't you?" Again, Marietta shook her head. "What do you mean by shaking your head, dear?" said Umbridge in a testy voice. "I would have thought her meaning was quite clear," said Professor... Sorry, I didn't know that was Dumbledore, of course. For McGonagall. Said Professor McGonagall harshly. "There have been no secret meetings for the past 6 months. Is that correct, Miss Edgecombe?" Marietta nodded. "But there was a meeting tonight," said Umbridge furiously. "There was a meeting, Miss Edgecombe. You told me about it in the Room of Requirement. And Potter was the leader. Was he not? Potter organized it. Potter. Why are you shaking your head, girl?" "Well," nope, still not Dumbledore. Damn. "Well, usually when a person shakes their head," said McGonagall coldly, "they mean no. So unless Miss Edgecombe is using a form of sign language as yet unknown to humans." Professor Umbridge seized Marietta, pulled her around to face her, and began shaking her very hard. A split second later, Dumbledore was on his feet, his wand raised. Kingsley started forward, and Umbridge leapt back from Marietta, waving her hands in the air as though they had been burned. "I cannot allow you to manhandle my students, Dolores," said Dumbledore, and for the first time he looked angry. "You want to calm yourself, Madam Umbridge," said Kingsley in his deep, slow voice. "You don't want to get yourself in trouble now." "No," said Umbridge breathlessly, glancing up at the towering figure of Kingsley. "I mean, yes. You're right, Shacklebolt. I forgot myself." Marietta was standing exactly where Umbridge had released her. She seemed neither perturbed by Umbridge's sudden attack, nor relieved by her release. She was still clutching her robe up to her oddly blank eyes, staring straight ahead of her. A sudden suspicion connected to Kingsley's whisper and the thing he had felt shoot past him sprang into Harry's mind. Dolores, said Fudge, with the air of trying to settle something once and for all. The meeting tonight. The one we know definitely happened. Yes, said Umbridge, pulling herself together. Yes. Well, Miss Edgecombe tipped me off, and I proceeded at once to the 7th floor, accompanied by certain trustworthy students, so as to catch those in the meeting red-handed. It appears that they were forewarned of my arrival, however, because when we reached the 7th floor, they were running in every direction. It doesn't matter, however. I have all their names here. Miss Parkinson ran into the room of requirement for me to see if they had left anything behind. We needed evidence, and the room provided. And to Harry's horror, she withdrew from her pocket the list of names that had pinned upon the room of requirements wall and handed it to Fudge. The moment I saw Potter's name on the list, I knew what we were dealing with, she said softly. Excellent, said Fudge, a smile spreading across his face. Excellent, Dolores. And by thunder, he looked up at Dumbledore, who was still standing beside Marietta, his wand held loosely in his hand. See what they've named themselves, said Fudge quietly. Dumbledore's army. Dumbledore reached out and took the parchment from Fudge. He gazed at the heading scribbled by Hermione months before, and for a moment seemed unable to speak. Then he looked up, smiling. Well, the game is up, he said simply. Would you like a written confession from me, Cornelius? Or would a statement before these witnesses suffice? Harry saw McGonagall and Kingsley look at each other. There was fear in both their faces. He did not understand what was going on, and neither, apparently, did Fudge. Statement, said Fudge slowly. What? I don't. Dumbledore's army, Cornelius, said Fudge. Said Dumbledore, still smiling as he waved the list of names before Fudge's face. Not Potter's army, Dumbledore's army. But, understanding blazed suddenly in Fudge's face. He took a horrified step backwards, yelped, and jumped out of the fire again. You? He whispered, stamping again on his smoldering cloak. That's right, said Dumbledore pleasantly. You organized this? I did, said Dumbledore. You recruited these students for your army? Tonight was supposed to be the first meeting, said Dumbledore, nodding, merely to see whether they would be interested in joining me. I see now it was a mistake to invite Miss Edgecombe, of course. Marietta nodded. Fudge looked from her to Dumbledore, his chest swelling. Then you have been plotting against me, he yelled. That's right, said Dumbledore cheerfully. No, shouted Harry. Kingsley flashed a look of warning at him. McGonagall widened her eyes threateningly, but it had suddenly dawned upon Harry what Dumbledore was about to do, and he could not let it happen. No, Professor Dumbledore. Be quiet, Harry, or I'm afraid you will have to leave my office, said Dumbledore calmly. Dumbledore's smooth. He is still running this room. Yes, shut up, Potter, barked Fudge, who was still ogling Dumbledore with a kind of horrified delight. Well, 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 I came here tonight expecting to expel Potter, and instead you get to arrest me, said Dumbledore, smiling. It's like losing a newt and finding a galleon, isn't it? That is exactly the game that Dumbledore is playing. Weasley, cried Fudge, now positively quivering with delight. Weasley, have you written it all down? Everything he's said, his confession, have you got it? Yes, sir. I think so, sir, said Percy eagerly, whose nose was splattered with ink from the speed of his note-taking. The bit about how he's been trying to build up an army against the ministry, how he's been working to destabilize me. Yes, sir, I've got it. Yes, said Percy, scanning his notes joyfully. Very well, then, said Fudge, now radiant with glee. Duplicate your notes, Weasley, and send a copy to the Daily Prophet at once. If we send a fast owl, we should make the morning edition. Percy dashed from the room, slamming the door behind him, and Fudge turned back to Dumbledore. You will now be escorted back to the ministry, where you'll be formally charged and then sent to Azkaban to await trial. Ah, said Dumbledore gently. Yes. Yes, I thought we might hit that little snag. Snag? Said Fudge, his voice still vibrating with joy. I see no snag, Dumbledore. Well, said Dumbledore apologetically, I'm afraid I do. Oh, really? Well, it's just that you seem to be laboring under the delusion that I'm going to, what is the phrase? Come quietly. I'm afraid I'm not going to come quietly at all, Cornelius. I have absolutely no intention of being sent to Azkaban. I could break out, of course, but what a waste of time. And frankly, I can think of a whole host of things I would rather be doing. Oh, now he's just messing with them. Umbridge's face was growing steadily redder. She looked as though she was being filled with boiling water. Fudge stared at Dumbledore with a very silly expression on his face, as though he had just been stunned by a sudden blow and could not quite believe it had happened. He made a small choking noise and then looked around at Kingsley and the man with the short gray hair, who alone of everyone in the room had remained entirely silent so far. The latter gave Fudge a reassuring nod and moved forward a little away from the wall. Harry saw his hand drift almost casually towards his pocket. Don't be silly, Dawlish, said Dumbledore kindly. I'm sure you are an excellent orar. I seem to remember that you achieved outstanding in all your notes. But if you attempt to, bring me in by force, I will have to hurt you. The man called Dawlish blinked, looking rather foolish. He looked toward Fudge again, but this time seemed to be hoping for a clue as to what to do next. So, sneered Fudge, recovering himself, you intend to take on Dawlish, Shacklebolt, Dolores, and myself single-handed, do you, Dumbledore? Merlin's beard, no, said Dumbledore, smiling. Not unless you're foolish enough to force me to do so. He will not be single-handed, said Professor McGonagall loudly, plunging her hands inside her robes. Oh, yes, he will, Minerva, said Dumbledore sharply. Hogwarts needs you. Enough of this rubbish, said Fudge, pulling out his own wand. Dawlish, Shacklebolt, take him. A streak of silver light flashed around the room. There was a bang like a gunshot, and the floor trembled. A hand grabbed the scruff of Harry's neck and forced him down on the floor as a second silver flash went off. Several of the portraits yelled. Fox screeched, and a cloud of dust filled the air. Coughing in dust, Harry saw a dark figure fall to the ground with a crash in front of him. There was a shriek and a thud, and somebody cried, no. Then the sound of breaking glass, frantically scuffling footsteps, a groan, and silence. Harry struggled around to see who was half strangling him and saw Professor McGonagall crouched beside him. She had forced both him and Marietta out of harm's way. Dust was still floating gently down through the air onto them. Panting slightly, Harry saw a very tall figure moving toward them. Are you all right? Said Dumbledore. Yes, said Professor McGonagall, getting up and dragging Harry and Marietta with her. The dust was clearing. The wreckage of the office loomed into view. Dumbledore's desk had been overturned. All of the spindly tables had been knocked to the floor, their silver instruments in pieces. Fudge, Umbridge, Kingsley, and Dawlish lay motionless on the floor. Fox, the phoenix, soared in wide circles above them, singing softly. Unfortunately, I had to hex Kingsley too, or it would have looked very suspicious, said Dumbledore in a low voice. He was remarkably quick on the uptake, modifying Mrs. Edgecomb's memory like that while everyone was looking the other day. Thank him for me, won't you, Minerva? Now, they will all awake very soon. It will be best if they do not know that we had time to communicate. You must act as though no time has passed, as though they were merely knocked to the ground. They will not remember. Where will you go, Dumbledore? Whispered Professor McGonagall. Grimmauld Place? Oh, no, said Dumbledore with a grim smile. I'm not leaving to go into hiding. Fudge will soon wish he never dislodged me from Hogwarts. I promise you. Professor Dumbledore, Harry began. He did not know what to say first. How sorry he was that he had started the DA in the first place and caused all this trouble, or how terrible he felt that Dumbledore was leaving to save him from expulsion. But Dumbledore cut him off before he could say another word. Listen to me, Harry, he said urgently. You must study occlumency as hard as you can. Do you understand me? Do everything Professor Snape, do everything Professor Snape tells you and practice it regularly every night before sleeping so that you can close your mind to bad dreams. You will understand why. You will understand why soon enough. But you must promise me. The man called Dawlish was stirring. Dumbledore seized Harry's wrist. Remember, close your mind. But as Dumbledore's fingers closed over Harry's skin, a pain shot through the scar on his forehead, and he felt again that terrible, snake-like longing to strike Dumbledore, to bite him, to hurt him. You will understand, whispered Dumbledore. Fox circled the office, swooped low over him. Dumbledore released Harry, raised his hand, grasped the phoenix's long golden tail. There was a flash of fire, and the pair of them had gone. Where is he? Yelled Fudge, pushing himself up from the ground. Where is he? I don't know, shouted Kingsley, also leaping to his feet. Well, he can't have disapparated, cried Umbridge. You can't inside this school. The stairs, cried Dawlish, and he flung himself upon the door, wrenched it open, and disappeared, followed closely by Kingsley and Umbridge. Fudge hesitated, then got to his feet slowly, brushing dust from his front. There was a long and painful silence. Well, Minerva, said Fudge nastily, straightening his torn shirt sleeve. I'm afraid this is the end of your friend Dumbledore. You think so, do you? Said Professor McGonagall scornfully. Fudge seemed not to hear her. He was looking around at the wrecked office. A few of the portraits hissed at him. One or two even made rude hand gestures. You better get those two off to bed, said Fudge, looking back at Professor McGonagall with a dismissive nod toward Harry and Marietta. A dismissive nod. She said nothing, but marched Harry and Marietta to the door. As it swung closed behind them, Harry heard Phineas Nigelus's voice. You know, Minister, I disagree with Dumbledore on many counts, but you cannot deny he's got style. And thus ends chapter 27. All right, viewer comments. We'll hit the tabs, do a chapter roll-up, and be done. If you're still with me after 50 minutes, thanks. All right. If Willie Wittershins had indeed heard every word, there's simply no escaping it. Is that true? Or did we foreclose on possibilities a little too quickly on this one? Obviously so, because even though he didn't see a solution, there was one. He just wasn't able to provide it. Ah, and then here's the part where Fudge is talking about the latest cock and bull story. Or is there the usual simple explanation involving blah, 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 blah? And he lists off a bunch of things. We remember in the beginning chapter in book 4 that the entire reason that the Ministry of Magic and Dumbledore are at oppositions is because they are disagreeing about the state of reality, mostly concerning Voldemort, but they disagree about how the world actually is. And Fudge continues to show us a pattern where he is unwilling to seriously consider complicated solutions or complicated problems. Fudge always wants it to be simple. And then Percy joins in real quick, just long enough to indicate what side he's on, signaling his allegiance. And Dumbledore smiles. And then Dumbledore, quite correctly, points out that the rule that they're trying to use wasn't in effect at the time of the thing that they had evidence for. And then Percy looks as if he had been struck in the face. Physical reaction. Percy shows his support, and Dumbledore knocks the support out of Fudge's argument right after Percy spoke up, and he looks like he got slapped. And then we're back to Miss Edgecombe. Dumbledore treats Miss Edgecombe with respect and a little bit of kindness. Umbridge says, I'm sure that won't make the spots worse. Okay. How? You don't know what the spell is. You don't know how to cure it. How are you sure that it won't make it worse? You're not. You just don't care. You're going to tell her whatever comes to mind to get her to do what you want, and you do not care about the consequences to Marietta. And I suspect that becomes kind of clear to Marietta. Umbridge tries to coax her. Come on now. That won't activate the jinx further. Again. Says who? All right. And her eyes look oddly blank. I know that's explained with a spell later, but there could be other reasons for that. And after the treatment, Marietta has several reasons not to talk. Several reasons not to talk. But after the treatment of her by Umbridge and the treatment of her by Dumbledore, in that moment, even if I had full memory, I would no longer be supporting Umbridge's side in any way. So even without the spell, we might have gotten to the same effect just because of the way that Umbridge and Fudge were treating Marietta. And Umbridge is furious. And then she starts ranting at Marietta, and Marietta's shaking her head. McGonagall puts a little fuel on the fire with just a good touch at the right time. And then Umbridge grabs this girl, pulls her around, and starts shaking her hard. Dumbledore doesn't even think. The cold and calculating guy who's running the room reacts instantly to protect his student. Now, let's think about the Ministry of Magic. Let's think about their standards. We just saw a teacher physically abuse a student in front of witnesses, undeniably. And not only is she not in trouble, she's warned because, quote, you don't want to get yourself into trouble now. She should be in trouble. This is clearly a very low standard, at least for Ministry of Magic employees. I forgot myself. I would argue that you cannot forget yourself. You can, when overwhelmed, forget who you're pretending to be. Marietta was standing exactly where she had been released. She was neither perturbed nor relieved. Blank eyes, staring straight ahead. All right, so again, it's explained by magic, but there are other things that could produce an exactly enough similar response in real humans without a magic spell. And again, we're not controlling the information about our sources very well. Miss Parkinson. Ah, okay. So now the resistance has another name to at least pay attention to. And then that list that we talked about comes back out. Because the room of requirements still does its job, even for people we don't like. See what they've named themselves? Said Fudge quietly. Dumbledore's army. Yes. And we see this in the real world too. There are a lot of people who insist if they agree with what it means, then a label must be true. And there are, just because there's a label on a thing doesn't make it true. We know that Dumbledore actually didn't organize this directly. He didn't have any direct influence or authority over it, and he wasn't running it. But because the kids chose to write his name up top, Fudge takes that as evidence without even considering it. And then after Dumbledore read it, he smiled yet again. Understanding blazed suddenly in Fudge's face. He took a horrified step backward, yelped, and jumped out of the fire. Again. All right. What does this guy walking into the fire during this argument? Yeah. Take that thought. Now let's go back to Harry with little baby Groot under the tree, staring off at Malfoy, and our conversations about where to focus your attention. The man literally keeps trying to set himself on fire. Is he directing his attention appropriately? He's also not doing well in this conversation with Dumbledore. What might be operating inside Fudge right now? Interesting, I think. Here we go. Then you have been plotting against me, he yelled. So Fudge considers himself equivalent in some way to the Ministry of Magic. He thinks he is the Ministry of Magic, and the Ministry of Magic is him. I do not think this is an attitude that you want in an organizational administrator. That's right, Dumbledore says cheerfully. No, shouts Harry, because, well, we'll hold on to that one, but Harry reacts almost immediately. This is page 619. Harry hasn't really had any direct conversations with Dumbledore this entire book, and he's been furious at Dumbledore this entire book. And the second that it looks like Dumbledore's in trouble, Harry shouts, "No." What might we make of that? Kingsley shot a look of warning at Harry. Isn't that interesting? It had dawned upon Harry what Dumbledore was about to do, and he could not let that happen. Dumbledore is a wily operator. Let's think about earlier in the series, Harry. He couldn't predict what Malfoy was going to do. And he can't figure out Dumbledore's whole plan, obviously, but he knows he has reason to believe he understands the next step that Dumbledore is going to take, and he's more or less correct. Harry is definitely thinking about other people way more productively than he used to. Be quiet, Harry, or I'm afraid you will have to leave my office. All right, let's flip back to that lens where we talk about information flow and asymmetry, asymmetry of information, and how much that's important to Harry. And in one line, that's what Dumbledore told him. Hey, if you want the information that's happening in this room, be quiet. If any of you were ever children, and I assume some of you were, in my experience, when I was a kid and people would come over and adults would congregate and do interesting things, when it got late at night, my trick to stay up and be around the activity and maybe get my hands on some snacks was to be as quiet and undemanding and inoffensive as possible. I'm sure a lot of other people have done that very same trick. Yes. And then Fudge is set back on his heels for a moment by this unexpected victory. And then he says, I came here tonight expecting to expel Potter, and instead, from his own lips, the conclusion was already determined before Fudge even got there. This was always a show. Yeah. There was never going to be anything fair in this process because it was already prejudged. Percy's nose was splattered with ink. Perhaps something like a brown nose? All right. And let's look at this part too. We haven't had a trial. Not entirely sure on what the crime is. What actual crime is involved? And then we're sending word without any verification to the major news outlets. Does that sound like responsible leadership? It does not to me. All right, and then the part where Dumbledore tells him that he could break out, but it's a waste of time and he just has better things to do. It's true. It's also a little unnecessarily needling Fudge to get him even more provoked. Fudge is the one who's destabilized in this situation. And Dumbledore is getting him a little bit more destabilized. That's interesting. How is that going to serve Dumbledore? He's doing it for a reason. I'm not sure what it is, though. Umbridge was steadily growing redder, like she was being filled with boiling water. This is an observable thing. This is something that a person could see for themselves. And then Fudge was stunned. We should note that the first one to recover to try and take action after we threaten Dawlish kindly and allow Dawlish to make a choice for himself. Yeah. After that part, Umbridge is the first one to react, a little quicker on the draw, so to speak. All right. That's what I was going to say here. The man called Dawlish blinked, looking rather foolish. He looked towards Fudge again, but this time seemed to be hoping for a clue as to what to do next. Yep. Dawlish is in a position where he can't or doesn't want to execute his instructions for obvious reasons, and he literally looks to his leadership for direction, hoping for a clue as to what to do next. Now, this is useful in this room, but also think about this symbolically, as Fudge is the head of the Ministry of Magic, and people are looking to that leadership throughout the organization and the wizarding world for direction and leadership and what to do next. So, sneered Fudge, you intend to take on Dawlish, Shacklebolt, Dolores, and myself? AKA, we're going to throw the entire weight of the institution against you as an individual. That's the direction that the Ministry of Magic has for Dawlish. If you can't squish him by yourself, we'll squish him all together. I like how so the distracting thing happens and they're all knocked out. And I know it's magic, but it seems like the effect of that trap, I guess we'll call it, is very much like the effect of chucking a flashbang grenade into a room before you do a dynamic entry. Tactically entering a room and having your opponents completely disorganized and dysregulated by force of surprise, overwhelming stimulation in multiple senses. And McGonagall, had saved both the kids. We should note that Dumbledore's office has always been a cool and special place. There is probably some meaning in the fact that his office is now entirely wrecked. The silver instruments in pieces. It's almost as if saying, there is nothing here for him to return to. Is that true? Probably not. Does he want people to believe that's true? Probably so. Where will you go, Dumbledore? Whispered Professor McGonagall. Well, it's bad information security to tell if you're on the run or avoiding capture. And also, you don't want to live too close with too many of your people if you're trying to lead and conduct an operation that has several different strings. He can't be that tight with the rest of them that he's in Grimmauld Place. He must keep himself at least a step removed. Partially because of information security. Professor Dumbledore, Harry began, and his narration is no longer, his internal narration is no longer outwardly focused. He's not thinking about Dumbledore quite so much. He's thinking about him. He was sorry that he had and caused all this, or he felt that Dumbledore was leaving to save him. Harry was thinking about Harry's negative feelings, and Dumbledore cut him off before he could say one more word. We haven't had a lot of words between the two of these characters thus far. And on page 622, Dumbledore looks Harry dead in the eyes and says, "Listen to me, Harry." And he tells him what to do. And he tells him to do it with somebody he hates. And he tells him to do it hard. And he tells him to do it why? So he can close his mind to bad dreams. And he tells him that he will need it. And he tells him that understanding will come later. Oh. Ladies and gentlemen, I am not a therapist and I do not give advice, but I feel like that could be a pretty nice metaphor for the overall therapeutic and trauma recovery process. Perhaps there might be an idea in there worth exploring. "Well, Minerva," said Fudge nastily. Seeing a lot of character out of the Ministry Magic people this chapter, and I am not favorably impressed. The portraits hissed at him. One or two even made rude hand gestures. The portraits are institutional continuity. They're like the memory of the organization. A lot of real organizations, when you leave, the only artifacts or memory of you after a while is maybe some paperwork shoved in the back of a file cabinet, or some work product you did, or maybe an SOP that's still getting used. At Hogwarts, the old leadership are still available, and so is their knowledge if you care to ask. Rarely, though, people do, because the only thing the portraits have is information. But people want to do things, so nobody talks to the portraits. And then Fudge is done, with Harry and Marietta dismissed utterly. If there was ever a thought of justice and actually handling real infractions, why would you not investigate further? Why would you just let Harry off the hook if you thought he had actually done something wrong? I think a more simple explanation is you always knew that Harry wasn't actually doing anything wrong. The target was always Dumbledore. And I think that's a pretty good wrap up for today. So let's hit these bazillion tabs that I'm behind on. I do apologize. I hate running between scenes that long, but this really was one giant scene. So I didn't have a lot of places there for that. Katie, I love how Dumbledore is using the rules against them, just like in Harry's trial. Yeah. That's at least 2 samples of the same effective behavior. Katie, haha, love McGee's sass. Yeah, she's restrained, but she's kind of like a fencer, McGee doesn't verbally swing swords around. She has a pokey little sword, and at the right time, she just goes poke, right in the good spot. Kind of like Fred and George with the snowballs. Dumbledore is usually so calm, and so when there are moments like this, when he gets angry, it feels really significant. Yes. And let's flip that around. What about characters that frequently get angry, like Fudge? Does it feel significant when he gets angry? Then from Bex, I love this moment when Umbridge loses her control for a split second in front of Fudge and Dumbledore. Uh-huh. And her behavior wasn't really discussed by Fudge, wasn't it? Katie, Umbridge's sweet persona dissolves and her true colors come out when she feels she's losing control. They are not the same person, but there are several similarities I see between the fictional character of Umbridge and the fictional character of Bernadette from The Big Bang Theory. The sweet presentation and the absolute willingness to cause chaos and suffering that hides just below it. So yeah, I definitely agree about the Umbridge thing. From Bex, Umbridge tells Marietta to just nod or shake her head and then tries to manipulate the answers. Yes, coercive. Nothing about consent. It's coercive. And then Katie. Fudge's worst fear was that Dumbledore was building an army in the school against him. Yes. And why? Why would a person be afraid of such a thing when not that long ago they did have a cordial working relationship? Why would you fear a rational, responsible leader would be coming after you? That's a fun question. From Katie, one of my favorite Dumbledore moments. It's a good moment. I seem to remember that I really enjoyed that scene in the movie. And from Katie, if your wizard prison can't stop the most powerful people from escaping, then you have a problem. There's already a problem in Azkaban. I mean, didn't we see a poster with 10 heads on it not that long ago in Hogsmeade? And then from Katie, you can't disapparate, but you can leave by Phoenix. Hermione never accounted for that because it's not in Hogwarts a history. That's nice. Thank you, because that's a great layup. Correct. It's not in the institutional knowledge, just like Hermione's jinx with the sneak thing. The things that work against the ministry are the things the ministry does not yet know about or understand. Yes. And then from Bex, what page are we on? We finally got the face-to-face to Dumbledore discussion. It was only a few seconds long. Ironically, I've already answered that. That was page 622. Love the question, though. Thanks. Your point is absolutely correct and important. And then from Katie, Fudge knows he's not good enough in his job. I like that. Hagrid said in the first book that Fudge was always asking him for advice. Do we think it's maybe something like vastly insecure because he knows he's managed to get himself promoted far beyond his competence? It's maybe not something like he feels imposter syndrome. Perhaps it's something more like he knows he is. Could be. And Katie again asking Dumbledore for advice. I meant he. Well, that makes a lot more sense because I really couldn't remember that scene. But I do have the memory of a goldfish. Well, we're at almost an hour and 20 minutes. Thanks for bearing with me. You're probably tired of it. I know I am. For now, join me soon. I haven't picked a date yet for chapter 28, Snape's Worst Memory. Thanks for joining me. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you soon.